Despite the blizzard that had ravaged Black Pine Forest through the night, Daniel Hayes and his dog Apollo pushed deeper into the frozen wilderness. What began as a quiet hunt turned into something else, something divine. Hours earlier, a streak of fire had ripped across the sky, vanishing behind the ridgeline with a thunder that shook the valley. Apollo wouldn't stop barking, his instincts pulling Daniel through waist-deep snow and silence thick enough to choke. Then, amid the smoke and the scent of jet fuel, they saw it. The shattered remains of a plane, twisted and burning against the trees. And lying in the snow beside it, a young woman barely alive, whispering one word before collapsing: "Help." Please support us by subscribing to our channel, because what Daniel and Apollo found in those woods would change not only their lives, but the fate of everyone who still believes in quiet miracles. The wind moved like a living thing through the trees, carrying the scent of snow and pine resin over the slopes of Black Pine Forest, Montana. The air was sharp, brittle, the kind that bit into the lungs and made silence feel heavier. Daniel Hayes trudged through the drifts with a rifle slung across his shoulder, his breath rising in short clouds that dissolved into the cold. Daniel was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had once looked indestructible. His face bore the quiet geography of years spent in combat, a crooked line of scar running along his jaw, the beginning of silver threading his short dark hair. He kept a trimmed stubble that shadowed his angular face, more out of habit than vanity. His eyes, a deep steel blue, held a distance that no one could cross. Once, they had been alive with purpose. Now they carried the dull sheen of survival. He had been an army ranger, disciplined, sharp, the kind of soldier who led others through chaos. But years after leaving Kandahar, the desert still lived inside him. The sound of helicopters, the smell of burnt metal, and most of all, the memory of Eli Turner, his best friend, laughing one second and dying the next, had carved an emptiness inside him that refused to heal. He had tried cities, noise, people, but every voice reminded him of radio chatter in the field. So he came here, to the forest, to silence. His cabin stood near the frozen banks of Elk Creek, small, made of rough-hewn logs, its roof sagging under years of snow. The place was half home, half prison. Inside, he kept everything in perfect order, rifle cleaned, boots lined by the door, canned food stacked precisely on the shelf. Routine kept the ghosts in check. That morning, he was tracking deer. The trail was faint but fresh, small hoofprints pressed deep in the white powder. Hunting wasn't for sport, it was survival, a ritual of self-sufficiency that reminded him he still existed. The forest was vast, painted in shades of gray and white, and every crunch of his boots echoed like a heartbeat. Hours passed without sound, until the quiet broke. Ahead in the clearing lay something that didn't belong, a dark, uneven shape half buried in snow. Instinct tightened Daniel's muscles. His hand went to the rifle. He approached slowly, the world narrowing into a tunnel of breath and pulse. It wasn't a deer. It was a dog. A large German shepherd, its fur a mix of gray and white mottled with blood. One hind leg twisted unnaturally, a deep gash cut across its flank, edges scorched as if burned. Daniel crouched, heart thudding. The animal's chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. Steam drifted from its muzzle, faint and trembling. Its eyes were closed, lashes crusted with ice. For a moment, Daniel froze. Something inside him recoiled, that dangerous flicker of empathy he had buried for years. He told himself to walk away. Nature was cruel. This was its way. But the voice that had once commanded soldiers cut through the haze. You don't leave someone behind. He slung his rifle and knelt beside the animal. Easy, boy, he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. His gloved hands brushed away the snow, feeling the dog's ribs move beneath the fur. Still alive, barely. Daniel looked around. No tracks, no collar, no sign of an owner, just the forest swallowing everything. The injury was no accident. He could tell by the clean slice, the burned fur, a bullet graze. Someone had shot this dog and left it to die. A flicker of anger rose in him, not the explosive kind he'd known in war, but something colder, older. He removed his coat, wrapped the dog gently, and lifted it in his arms. The weight surprised him. The animal was solid, heavy with muscle. Its head lolled against his shoulder, warm breath faint against his neck. Back at the cabin, he cleared the table and laid the dog down on an old wool blanket. The creature whimpered once, but didn't fight. Daniel moved like a man waking from a long sleep. He opened a dusty metal case under his bed, a medic kit from his service days. Inside were yellowed gauze rolls, iodine, a suture needle. His fingers knew what to do. The muscle memory of field surgery came alive. He cleaned the wound with water warmed on the stove, murmuring under his breath like a prayer. The scent of antiseptic filled the small cabin. The dog's fur was soft beneath his fingers, though matted with dried blood. When he sewed the gash, his hands were steady, steadier than they'd been in years. He set the leg with 2 carved branches, bound tightly with strips of torn flannel. The animal's breathing steadied, the rise and fall even now. Daniel poured a few drops of water against its tongue, and the dog swallowed weakly. He let out a slow exhale, realizing his own chest hurt, not from the cold, but from caring again. When the work was done, he sat back against the wall, exhaustion settling over him. The cabin glowed in the amber flicker of the fire, shadows moving across the walls. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Outside, the forest sighed. The dog stirred, its eyes opened, gold flecked with brown, intelligent, searching. For a heartbeat, man and animal just looked at each other. Then Daniel spoke, his voice low and rough. "You're a fighter," he said. "Guess I should call you something fitting." He thought for a moment, then whispered, "Apollo." The name hung in the air, familiar and heavy. It had been the name he and Eli once promised to give a dog when the war ended, a small dream of peace that never came true. Apollo blinked as if recognizing something in the sound, then lowered his head back onto the blanket. Daniel added another log to the fire, the warmth spreading through the cabin. For the first time in years, he felt something loosen inside his chest, a thread of connection in the vast silence. He pulled his chair near the hearth, his rifle leaning within reach out of old habit. The dog's breathing became slow and rhythmic, matching the crackle of the flames. Daniel's eyelids grew heavy. When sleep came, it was deep and merciful. In the dream, he was back in the desert, but there was no gunfire, no blood. Only a distant bark echoing across the dunes and the sound of Eli's laughter fading with the wind. Daniel woke just before dawn, heart pounding, unsure if he had been dreaming or remembering. The fire had burned low. The cabin smelled of ash and fur. He looked at Apollo, still asleep beside the hearth, chest rising steady. Outside, the first pale light crept across the snow. For a long moment, Daniel stood at the window, watching it. Then he turned his gaze back to the dog. "Maybe you and I," he murmured, "aren't done with the world just yet." But neither of them knew. Far out beyond the tree line, a thin thread of smoke was rising into the pale sky. The morning began with a dim gray light crawling through the clouds, the kind that made the world look washed out and dreamlike. Daniel Hayes stood outside his cabin, the cold air biting his cheeks, his breath fogging in the silence. Beside him, Apollo limped gently across the snow, his splinted leg improving, though the stiffness still made each step deliberate. The forest had become their fragile routine, the man who had stopped speaking to the world, and the dog who refused to die. Daniel poured a handful of kibble into a tin bowl, the soft clink echoing in the cold. Apollo ate methodically, every movement cautious but determined. His coat was thicker now, the gray and white fur clean and brushed, a faint scar visible on his flank. A quiet reminder of violence survived. Daniel found himself talking to him more each day, short muttered phrases that filled the silence. "You're healing faster than I did," he said once, and almost smiled. For nearly 2 weeks, peace held its fragile form. The forest was alive with the quiet hum of winter, crows calling over the ridge, the groan of trees under snow. But on that particular afternoon, something changed. Daniel was splitting firewood when Apollo stiffened, head lifting, ears pricked. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Daniel followed his gaze. Through the shifting veil of snow, far beyond the creek, a faint vertical line rose into the sky, a thin thread of gray smoke. It wasn't from his chimney. His cabin was the only human dwelling within 20 miles. He felt the old instinct stir, the soldier's reflex that measured threat before reason. He set the axe down, strapped his rifle to his shoulder, and whistled softly. Apollo limped to his side, eyes alert, tail low but steady. They moved together through the woods, the snow deep and unbroken except for the tracks of small animals. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying a scent Daniel couldn't name, something burnt, metallic. The closer they got, the stronger it became. The smoke came from a small valley cut by an icy stream. Daniel crouched behind a fallen log and raised his binoculars. What he saw didn't make sense at first. Wreckage, metal twisted among the trees, half buried in snow. A small aircraft, its silver fuselage shattered, one wing snapped clean off. His pulse quickened. He scanned for movement. At first, nothing. Then, a flicker. Someone moving near the wreck. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark parka and snow gear. He was dragging debris aside with quick, forceful motions. Another shape lay nearby, smaller, unmoving, covered with a blanket. Daniel adjusted the focus. Beneath the soot and ice, the second figure was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, her hair tangled and dark, her face pale. The man crouched beside her, feeding sticks into a small fire. His gestures were methodical, efficient, but there was something strange about the way he kept glancing toward the trees, alert, watchful, as if guarding rather than helping. Apollo whined softly, nose twitching. Daniel put a hand on his neck. Easy. The man by the fire turned suddenly, eyes scanning the woods. Even at a distance, Daniel saw his face clearly through the binoculars. Angular, unshaven, early 40s, his jaw set hard. There was a jagged scar across his right eyebrow, the kind that spoke of violence. His eyes were pale gray, cold, calculating, a survivalist perhaps, or something worse. Daniel's gut told him to stay hidden. Years of fieldwork had taught him to trust instinct. He watched for nearly 10 minutes. The man tended the fire, occasionally adjusting the woman's blanket, but she didn't move. When he turned his back, her eyes flicked open, wide with fear, and then she did something that made Daniel's breath catch. She lifted her hand, low and trembling, curling her thumb into her palm, the same silent SOS signal for distress every soldier knew. Daniel's mind snapped into focus. Whoever this man was, he wasn't helping her. He and Apollo slipped back through the trees, retracing their steps. Once out of sight, Daniel leaned against a pine, heart pounding. The memories came fast. Captured civilians, fake rescue camps, faces of the desperate who couldn't call for help. He shut his eyes, drew in a long breath of frozen air, and whispered, "Not again." Back at the cabin, he stoked the fire to full strength and began laying out gear on the table. Flashlight, rope, first aid kit, ammunition. The rhythm calmed him, the same mechanical efficiency that once prepared him for missions in the dark. Apollo circled near the door. Restless, his eyes bright. "You saw it too," Daniel said. The dog's tail thumped once. He brewed a cup of black coffee, staring into the flames while the plan formed in his head. He would wait until dusk. The light would hide his approach. He couldn't storm in. That would risk the girl's life. He needed to observe, to confirm, then extract if possible. The afternoon passed in slow minutes. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the distant cry of a hawk. By the time the sun began to dip behind the mountains, Daniel was dressed in his dark hunting gear, rifle slung tight, knife strapped to his leg. He had added a compact radio and a small headlamp. Old habits. The soldier beneath the exile was waking again. Before leaving, he crouched beside Apollo. "You stay behind," he said firmly. The dog's ears flattened, a low protest rumbling in his chest. Daniel placed a hand on his head. "You're still healing. You'll guard the cabin. If I don't come back, you know what to do." It was half joke, half prayer. Apollo licked his wrist, eyes unreadable, then lay down by the hearth. The forest was a cathedral of darkness as Daniel moved through it, his steps soundless. The snow absorbed every noise, turning the world into a hushed maze of silver and shadow. When he reached the ridge overlooking the crash site, night had fallen. A single fire still burned near the wreck, glowing orange against the black. The man was there, pacing around the flames, occasionally glancing toward the woods. The woman sat motionless near the wreck, her arms wrapped around herself. Even from afar, Daniel could sense her exhaustion, the rigid posture of someone pretending not to be afraid. Her hair caught the firelight, reflecting faint copper hues. Daniel adjusted his binoculars again, scanning the perimeter. There were no other footprints besides theirs. No trail of rescue, no other survivors. The wreck was isolated, like an island of steel in a sea of white. He watched until his eyes stung from the cold. The man seemed restless now, muttering to himself, then suddenly hurled a piece of debris into the darkness with a violent shout. The woman flinched. Daniel's hand tightened on the binoculars. Something inside him shifted. That quiet rage he'd buried since the war. He knew the type. Men like that thrived on control and fear. The girl wasn't a companion. She was a hostage. He lowered the binoculars, jaw clenching. The soldier in him began mapping terrain, distance, line of sight. He could reach the plane from the west, use the stream bed as cover. But he needed confirmation, a plan that wouldn't get the girl killed dead. The snow fell thicker now, muffling even thought. In the flickering distance, the man sat by the fire again, feeding it idly, while the girl's eyes flickered toward the dark woods, toward where Daniel hid, as if she could feel him there. And maybe she could. Daniel exhaled slowly, the ghost of his breath fading into the storm. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "tomorrow we find out who you are and what the hell happened out here." Far below, the last ember of the fire crackled, and from somewhere deep in the forest, a wolf howled, long, haunting, and impossibly close. The dawn came colorless and cold, the kind of light that flattened the world into shades of steel and ash. Daniel Hayes hadn't slept. He sat near the window of his cabin, coffee cooling untouched in his hand, eyes fixed on the distant tree line where he had seen the smoke. His mind moved with the precision of habit, assessing, planning, eliminating risk. Across the room, Apollo watched him, head resting on his paws, amber eyes bright but calm. The dog seemed to sense the shift in the air, that quiet heaviness before something irreversible. By mid-morning, Daniel had assembled everything he might need: rope, his hunting knife, extra ammunition, a small first aid kit, and a coil of nylon cord. The radio he'd kept from his service days sat on the table, tuned to emergency frequency. He had already tested it, static and silence, no rescue signal. Whatever had happened at that crash site, no one else was coming. He dressed in layers: black thermal shirt, faded fatigues, insulated jacket, and snow-patterned cover gear. His face was leaner than it had been years ago, but beneath the quiet exterior, the soldier still lived. He checked his rifle, loading each round with mechanical precision, then glanced at Apollo. "You're staying," he said firmly. The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Daniel crouched beside him, resting a hand on the thick fur around his neck. "You've done your part. I need you here. Guard the cabin." The dog tilted his head, as if understanding, then gave a single soft bark of protest. Daniel smiled faintly. "Good soldier." The forest swallowed him as he moved, his breath sinking with the rhythm of the snow underfoot. The wind had died down, leaving behind an eerie stillness. He followed the faint trail he had made the day before, weaving between the dark trunks of pine and spruce. The air smelled of smoke again, faint, but closer now. When he reached the ridge overlooking the wreck, he lay flat, belly pressed into the snow, and brought the binoculars to his eyes. The crash site was the same chaotic sprawl of broken metal and scorched snow. But something was different. The fire had burned low, and the man, Henshaw, was gone. Only the woman remained, huddled near the wreckage, her back to him. Her shoulders trembled, though whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. Daniel scanned the perimeter carefully. Tracks led away from the site toward the north slope, a single set of heavy boot prints. Henshaw had gone for supplies, or wood maybe, the opportunity he needed. He descended slowly, using the slope and fallen logs for cover. Every sound was magnified, the creak of snow beneath his boots, the faint rustle of branches. As he neared the clearing, he could hear her now, soft, shallow breathing, the occasional whimper muffled behind clenched teeth. She was trying to stay quiet. Daniel reached the fuselage, crouching beside a jagged tear in the metal. The edges were sharp, streaked with the soot. He risked a quick glance inside. The cabin was dim, lit only by the dying glow of embers. The woman sat near them, her face pale beneath streaks of soot. Up close, she looked younger than he'd thought, 24, maybe 25. Her dark hair hung loose in tangled waves, and her lips were split from the cold. Her right leg was splinted with what looked like a piece of curtain rod in torn fabric, and blood had seeped through. Her hands trembled as she tried to feed the last of the fire. Daniel moved closer, letting the barrel of his rifle tap softly against the metal to avoid startling her. She froze, eyes widening. Before she could speak, he whispered, "I'm here to help." His voice was low, steady. "Don't make a sound." For a second, she stared as if disbelieving. Then she nodded once, eyes glistening. "He'll be back," she whispered, voice raw. "Soon." Daniel's gaze swept the space. "What happened here?" Her breath hitched. "He crashed it. On purpose. My father was the pilot." Her words came in short, uneven bursts. "We were flying to Denver. He had evidence, documents, about illegal mining operations, Helios Corp. Henshaw was supposed to be co-pilot. He shot my father after the plane went down." Her voice broke on the last word. "He said no one would ever find us." Daniel's jaw clenched. He'd heard that name before. Helios Corp. Contractors, black-budget logistics, companies that thrived in war zones by cutting moral corners. He felt the old bitterness stir. "And the dog?" he asked quietly. She blinked, confusion flickering. "You saw him?" "He found me," Daniel said. "I patched him up." For the first time, hope flickered across her face. "That's my father's dog, Apollo." Her voice trembled. "He protected me during the crash. Henshaw shot him when he tried to attack." Daniel exhaled slowly. Everything connected now. The bullet graze, the dog's survival, the impossible instinct that had led Apollo through miles of wilderness, straight to him. He crouched beside her, scanning the tree line again. "We're leaving," he said. Before she could respond, a faint crunch echoed from outside, the slow, deliberate sound of boots on ice. Daniel's head snapped up. Henshaw was back. He motioned for Emily to stay low, then slipped toward the jagged opening of the fuselage. Through the falling snow, he saw the man emerge from the trees, hauling an axe and a bundle of wood. His parka was torn, face rough with several days' growth of beard. Even from a distance, Daniel could read the hardness in his posture, the arrogance of someone who had survived too long on dominance and fear. Henshaw paused, scanning the area. His instincts were sharp. Daniel could see the tension ripple through his shoulders. Then he stepped forward toward the wreck, muttering something under his breath. Daniel's mind worked fast. He couldn't risk a gunfight with Emily, inside. He needed to neutralize him fast and silent. As Henshaw bent to drop the wood, Daniel slipped from cover, circling wide. The snow helped, muting his steps. When Henshaw turned, Daniel was already behind him. "Drop it," Daniel ordered, his voice hard, the rifle steady. Henshaw froze, then slowly raised his hands, a smirk twisting his cracked lips. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who doesn't like men who shoot dogs," Daniel said. The smirk faded. "You've made a mistake, friend." "I don't think so." But Henshaw's eyes flicked left, calculating, and in a heartbeat, he moved. He slammed backward into Daniel's chest, knocking the rifle aside. The two men crashed into the snow, grappling, fists flying. Daniel's training took over, elbows, knees, precision strikes, but Henshaw was strong, feral, driven by desperation. They rolled through the slush, Daniel landing a sharp punch to Henshaw's jaw. The man grunted, reached for the axe. Daniel kicked it aside and drove his knee into Henshaw's ribs. The sound of something cracking split the air. Then Emily screamed, a sound that froze the blood. Both men turned. The fire had flared up again, sparks scattering across the wreckage. The heat licked at the torn fabric and wires. Smoke began to rise. Henshaw twisted free and lunged toward her, eyes wild. Daniel reacted faster, tackling him from behind, slamming him into the snow. His hands found the rope on his belt, looping it around Henshaw's wrists. The man struggled, but Daniel's grip was iron. "It's over," he growled. Henshaw spat blood into the snow. "You think you know what's happening here? You don't know anything." Daniel pulled the knot tight. "I know enough." Inside the wreck, Emily's face glowed orange in the flickering light. Smoke thickened around them, acrid and suffocating. Daniel turned toward her. "We need to move. Now." He dragged Henshaw by the rope, half carrying, half hauling him into the open air. The cold hit like a blade. As they cleared the wreck, the plane groaned, a long metallic cry of collapsing steel. Emily stumbled forward, leaning on Daniel's arm. "The documents," she gasped. "They're in the case, inside." Before he could stop her, she turned back toward the burning fuselage. Daniel shouted, "Emily!" but the words vanished into the roar of fire and wind. The sound came first, a deep metallic groan that rolled through the trees like thunder. Daniel Hayes barely had time to register it before the world exploded into motion. The fuselage of the crashed plane lurched, fire bursting through the torn metal with a hiss of oxygen and fury. Heat struck his face like a physical force. "Emily!" he shouted, the word tearing out of him as he lunged toward the flames. Behind him, Victor Henshaw cursed through gritted teeth, the rope biting into his wrists as he struggled in the snow, his voice a low snarl of hatred. Daniel didn't look back. The fire roared, orange and white against the gray sky, consuming what remained of the wreckage. He pushed through the thick smoke, pulling his jacket over his mouth. The air inside was suffocating, the heat searing. Through the haze, he saw Emily. She had reached the front section of the plane, her limp evident but her determination sharper than pain. The briefcase was wedged beneath a fallen seat, half-melted plastic dripping from the ceiling above. The girl's hand trembled as she reached for it, coughing hard, eyes watering. Daniel grabbed her by the shoulders. "We have to go." "The documents," she gasped. "My father? They're gone if you die here." He didn't wait for her reply. He hooked an arm under her knees, lifted her as she struggled weakly against him, and turned toward the breach in the hull. The fire cracked behind them, licking at his boots. Smoke filled his lungs, burning deep. The cold outside hit them like salvation as he stumbled into the open air. Snowflakes hissed as they landed on their scorched clothes. Emily coughed violently, clutching her side. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, brushing hair from her soot-streaked face. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "You're okay," he said quietly, more command than comfort. Behind them, the plane shuddered again. The heat was melting the snow around the wreck into blackened slush. The rope holding Henshaw had burned partially through. The man's face was twisted with rage, his breath forming plumes in the frigid air. "You don't know what you've done," he rasped, his tone both furious and strangely confident. "You think you saved her? You just made yourselves the next loose ends." Daniel's gaze hardened. "You talk too much." Henshaw's expression shifted, a cruel smirk breaking through the soot on his face. Then he moved faster than expected, rolling his shoulders, snapping the half-burned rope. Before Daniel could react, Henshaw lunged, tackling him into the snow. The impact drove the air from Daniel's lungs. The two men struggled, fists connecting, boots sliding on ice. The world narrowed to grunts, heat, and the sound of the inferno behind them. Henshaw landed a blow to Daniel's jaw, hard enough to send stars flashing through his vision. He followed with another, but Daniel twisted, grabbing the man's wrist and forcing it sideways until he heard the satisfying pop of a joint giving way. Henshaw roared in pain, but desperation fueled him. He grabbed a shard of metal debris, jagged and blackened, swinging it toward Daniel's neck. A growl cut through the chaos, low, furious, and close. Then came the impact. A blur of gray and white slammed into Henshaw's side, teeth sinking deep into the man's arm. Henshaw screamed, the weapon clattering into the snow. Apollo. The dog's arrival was like something pulled out of the storm itself. His fur was bristled, eyes blazing with purpose. His injured leg dragged slightly, but his body was pure motion and fury. Daniel rolled away as Apollo pinned Henshaw to the ground, snarling. Snow and blood mixed beneath them. "Enough!" Daniel barked, voice cutting through the noise. Apollo froze instantly, still hovering over the man, chest heaving. Henshaw groaned, clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. Daniel kicked the metal shard aside, breathing hard. "You're done," he said flatly. "Move and you won't get up again." He tore off a strip of rope from what was left of the bindings and secured Henshaw's wrists again, tighter this time. The man didn't resist. His eyes were glassy, full of hate but also something else. Fear. Emily had crawled closer, still clutching the briefcase. Somehow, impossibly, she had managed to grab it before the flames claimed it. Daniel knelt beside her. "You're insane," he said, half smiling despite the chaos. She gave a weak, smoke-roughened laugh. "Runs in the family." The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the distant groan of cracking ice. Daniel looked up at the sky. The storm was worsening, visibility dropping fast. They couldn't stay here. The plane's explosion would draw attention eventually, but he couldn't count on who might come first. He turned to Emily. "We move now. Cabin's 3 miles east. Can you walk?" She nodded, though her face tightened with pain. Daniel slung the rifle and helped her up, looping her arm around his shoulder. Apollo trotted ahead, limping slightly but unrelenting. Behind them, Henshaw stumbled as Daniel dragged him along by the rope. They moved through the forest as the blizzard came alive around them. Snow swept sideways, erasing the ground, the wind keening through the trees like a living voice. The fire's glow behind them faded into a distant smear of orange, swallowed by white. Daniel focused on each step, each breath, every instinct pushing forward. Emily's weight was light but unsteady. Twice she nearly fell, but he caught her each time. They crossed the frozen creek, the ice groaning beneath their boots. Henshaw stumbled, muttering curses under his breath. Apollo stopped briefly at the far bank, looking back at Daniel with a sharp bark, urging him to keep moving. By the time they reached the first rise of land, the snow was waist-deep. Daniel's body burned with fatigue, muscles trembling under the strain. He glanced at Emily. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow, but her grip on the briefcase was iron. "What's in that case worth dying for?" he asked, half to distract her, half out of curiosity. She hesitated before answering. "Proof. My father found records, payments, falsified safety reports, satellite photos of the Helios Corp mines. They've been dumping toxic waste into the northern rivers. Hundreds of people will die if it keeps going." Daniel let out a slow breath. "So it's not just about you." "It never was," she whispered. They trudged on in silence. The forest around them blurred into a gray haze. Once, Daniel thought he heard something, a low hum beneath the storm, mechanical and faint. He stopped, scanning the sky, but saw nothing, just clouds and snow. When the cabin finally came into view, a shadow among the trees, Daniel felt the last of his tension begin to crack. He guided Emily inside, lowering her gently onto the cot near the fire. Apollo immediately curled beside her, head resting on her arm. The warmth returned slowly to their faces, the color creeping back into their fingers. Henshaw sat bound in the corner, eyes fixed on the fire with a strange calm. "You think you can keep me here?" he muttered. "You don't understand the kind of people coming after that." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. "Maybe not. But you won't be the one telling them where we are." He tightened the rope until Henshaw winced, then stepped back. Outside, the blizzard intensified, battering the walls of the cabin with frozen fists. The world beyond was vanishing into white. Inside, the 3 humans and the dog huddled close to the fire, their fates suddenly bound together by something none of them had planned: survival, duty, and a storm still waiting to test them all. And far away, beyond the forest, a helicopter's beacon light blinked faintly through the snow, moving slowly toward the mountains. Morning came reluctantly, slipping into the world as a dull silver light through the storm. The blizzard had raged through the night, but now the wind was dying, leaving behind a world reshaped. Trees bowed under white weight, the creek frozen in silence, and the cabin standing like a stubborn survivor. Inside, the fire burned low but steady. Daniel Hayes sat near the window, his rifle across his knees. He hadn't slept. Every few minutes he looked toward the horizon where the faint hum of the helicopter had come hours earlier. It hadn't returned, but he knew it would. People like Henshaw never worked alone. Behind him, Emily Carter stirred beneath a wool blanket. Her face was pale but calmer now, her wounds cleaned and bandaged. Apollo lay beside her, his head resting on her leg, one ear twitching with every distant sound. Even in rest, the dog's body was coiled, alert. When Emily opened her eyes, her first word was a whisper, "We're alive." Daniel nodded, though his expression stayed grim. For now. Henshaw sat bound in the corner, his once defiant expression now hollow. The firelight painted his face in flickers, every shift revealing exhaustion, anger, and a strange, quiet acceptance. His arm was wrapped in cloth from the bite wound. Daniel had treated it just enough to keep him alive, not out of mercy, but duty. Soldiers didn't leave bodies behind, even the enemies. Emily pushed herself up, grimacing at the ache in her leg. "We can't stay here," she said softly. Daniel looked out the window again. "No," he agreed. "They'll send someone when the helicopter doesn't check in. The question is, who? And what they're willing to do to keep that evidence buried." Her eyes went to the briefcase near the fire, its metal edges blackened but intact. "This has to get out. My father died for it." Daniel studied her. The grief was still there, sharp and deep, but beneath it had grown something steadier, resolve. He saw in her the same quiet strength he'd once admired in Eli Turner, the man who'd saved his life more than once overseas. Maybe that was why helping her didn't feel like chance at all. Maybe it was repayment, years overdue. He stood and began gathering what supplies they could carry. Food, a compass, ammunition. "There's a ranger station 20 miles east," he said. "If the radio's still working, we can reach the federal network. Once you hand that over, it's out of their hands." Emily nodded. "And Henshaw?" Daniel glanced at the man, who gave a faint, bitter smile. "Don't worry about me," Henshaw said hoarsely. "By the time you reach that station, you'll wish you left me out there." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But I'm not like you." They left as the first hint of dawn touched the treetops. The storm had broken, leaving the world shining under a pale sky. Apollo led the way, his gait slow but sure, nose to the wind. Emily leaned. On Daniel's arm, the briefcase slung over her shoulder by a strap he'd fashioned from rope. Behind them, Henshaw stumbled through the snow, wrists bound. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel's instincts prickled. He scanned the horizon through his scope. Then he saw it. Movement. A dark shape cutting low across the white expanse. A helicopter. Smaller, faster. Not a rescue craft, but something else entirely. "They found us," he said. Emily's face blanched. "What do we do?" Daniel's mind raced. "Ridge ahead. We move fast. The trees will cover us." The machine closed in, the whine of its blades slicing the air. Snow erupted as they ran, Daniel half dragging Henshaw while Apollo and Emily pushed forward. A spotlight flared, sweeping the ground. Bullets tore into the snow behind them, sharp bursts of sound shattering the stillness. "Go!" Daniel shouted. They dove behind a boulder, breath ragged, snow spraying around them. Henshaw's laughter came low and broken. "Told you," he rasped. "You can't outrun what's coming." Daniel ignored him. He turned to Emily. "When I tell you, you and Apollo head for the ridge. Don't look back. The ranger station's just beyond the valley." "What about you?" "I'll buy time." She shook her head. "No." He met her gaze, calm and steady. "It's what I'm good at." Then, softer, "Your father would have done the same." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't argue. Daniel stood, checked his rifle, and looked once more at the pale morning sky. Then he moved, fast, controlled, like the soldier he'd sworn he'd never be again. The helicopter circled, spotlight sweeping. He fired once, twice, aiming for the rotor housing. The first shot missed, the second sparked against metal. The craft swerved, its pilot jerking the controls. "Now!" he shouted. Emily and Apollo broke cover, sprinting across the snow. The dog stayed close, his bark lost in the roar. Daniel kept firing, moving between trees, drawing their attention. A bullet grazed his shoulder, heat blooming down his arm, but he kept going. He didn't think about survival anymore, only distance, only time. The helicopter veered lower, the tail clipping a pine. Smoke burst from its side. It spun, shrieking metal against wind, then slammed into the trees in a thunder of splintered wood. Silence followed, heavy, absolute. Only the wind remained. When Emily turned back, Daniel was gone from sight. For one heartbeat, fear gripped her chest, until Apollo barked from the ridge, ears perked. Daniel emerged through the haze, limping, blood on his jacket but alive. Hours later, as the sun broke free from the clouds, they reached the ranger station, a lonely wooden outpost with a rusted antenna jutting toward the sky. Daniel handed Emily the radio mic. "Call them," he said. "Tell them everything." Her voice trembled only once as she transmitted. "Within minutes," a new voice crackled back. Clear, official, human. Help was on its way. When the rescue chopper finally came, the valley glowed in the orange light of sunset. Henshaw was taken into custody, silent and defeated. Emily handed the briefcase to the agents, her father's work finally out of danger. As she stood by the cabin door, she looked back at Daniel and Apollo. The man's face was weary, lined with exhaustion, but his eyes, those cold blue eyes, had changed. For the first time, there was peace. "Thank you," she said softly. He gave a small nod. "Take care of yourself, Emily." As the helicopter lifted her away, Daniel watched until it disappeared over the ridge. The forest fell quiet again. He turned to Apollo, who sat at his side, tail swaying gently. "Guess it's just us again," Daniel murmured. The dog looked up, eyes warm, trusting. Above them, the first gold streaks of dawn broke across the peaks. Not the dull gray of survival, but the clear, bright light of something new. Daniel stood in that light for a long moment, feeling the weight in his chest finally ease. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "We made it home." And the forest, endless and alive, seemed to breathe with him. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in flashes of light or thunder from the sky. They come quietly, in the form of a wounded dog limping through the snow or a broken man learning to care again. God doesn't always change our circumstances, but He changes our hearts so we can face them. In the frozen wilderness of Montana, Daniel found not just survival, but redemption, proof that even in the coldest places, grace still finds a way to burn warm. Just like Daniel, we all walk through our own winters, grief, loneliness, fear. But maybe the miracle isn't that the storm ends, but that we still have the strength to keep walking through it. Maybe that strength is God's whisper, "You're not alone." So if you've ever felt lost, forgotten, or burdened by the past, remember, miracles still happen. They just don't always look like what we expect. May God bless you, wherever you are watching from. May He give you courage in your storms and warmth when the world feels cold. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and what miracles you still believe in. Like this video to spread faith and light, and subscribe to Soulful Stories so you never miss the next story of grace, loyalty, and the quiet miracles that still move our world. Because sometimes God's greatest blessings come disguised as a stranger, a storm, or a loyal dog named Apollo.